Hello, listeners, and welcome to another episode of the Untethering Shame podcast. I'm your host, Kira Wackett, and I am incredibly excited for today's episode, where we're talking about eating disorders. Many of you know that I'm a licensed therapist turned coach who specialized in eating disorders and anxiety throughout my training. I've worked in the outpatient level all the way up through partial hospitalization with clients between the ages of 6 and well into their 80s. But what you might not know is that I'm also in recovery from my own eating disorder that took me deep into many layers of shame, fear, self-loathing, and weirdly, comfort. Eating disorders, disordered eating, and body image stress plague millions of us every day, especially in the time of social media. And yet this is a topic many of us still aren't talking about. Instead, we normalize or ignore it, while many companies and social media monetize it. For example, did you know that in the US alone, it's estimated that 28.8 million people, as of 2023, 28.8 million people will meet the diagnostic criteria for an eating disorder in their lifetime. And that doesn't even count the millions of people who struggle with their own body image or are fixated on the idea that they need to just lose a few more pounds or shame themselves into going to the gym or eating diet food. So what can we do? Look, one episode on a podcast talking about one person's story isn't going to change our entire social norm. We're still going to walk out the doors and see some BS marketing ad that instantly makes us judge ourselves. We're all going to have that one family member that's forever going to make a comment about someone's weight. And until the medical system stops using metrics like BMI, we're all going to hold on to this grossly oversimplified and factually untrue narrative that BMI is somehow a good metric for health. But at least we can create a ripple. At least we can start a conversation that allows you the opportunity to explore other possibilities that can exist instead of just believing that you're a problem until you reach a certain weight or body type or ideal. Joining me today to hold space for this important conversation is Kim Flores, registered nurse and founder of Sophrosony Health, who describes herself as a former anorexic turned CEO. After working in healthcare for over 10 years, burning herself out to keep up with the demands of an overtaxed system, Kim found herself walking away. Coming face to face with her own mental and emotional needs, she also began to see where the healthcare system was falling short for her patients. And she began her own healing journey, making a commitment to figuring out how to use her skills and expertise in a more holistic way to support not only herself, but future patients, clients, anybody she interacted with, so that they recognize that health and healing wasn't just physical, but mental, emotional, and psychological as well. Kim is an absolute force, and her radical honesty and self-reflection is incredibly powerful. I can't wait for you all to meet her. So let's get comfortable and dive in together. Welcome, Kim. I'm so excited.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
What they didn't hear in this intro is that we had to pause a couple times because I have such a hard time saying the name of your business. So I want to have them hear you say it really quick because it is such a beautiful name. And I think my anxiety still didn't do it justice.
So it is pronounced Sophrosony. Sophrosony.
And tell us what it means. Tell us the story behind it.
So it is a character trait. It's like an ancient Greek term, and it basically means someone who has this trait of excellence in all things, moderation in all things, a good listener, emotionally stable. And when I first heard the word, I was like, yes. All of the yes, this is what I want this business to embody. It's not just about our body image. It's not just about the scale. It is about who we are as a whole person and how our character is.
I love that. And it sounds like such a beautiful reminder for you every day when you come into, putting on the hat of a business owner and you know that that is your business and what it stands for. Like you said, moderation. It sounds like balance. It sounds like finding that anchor point in all aspects of self. Because as I'm sure we're going to get into, that wasn't something that maybe came naturally. And it wasn't something that was supported and conditioned in you based on a lot of the external systems that you were part of. And so, okay, so before we dive in and we get super into all of the weeds of that, I love to start every conversation just anchoring on where we're at coming into the space. So if you could give us one word to describe how you're feeling right now, either life that was going on until the last 10 minutes before we hit record, how you're feeling in this moment, whatever it is for you, what's one word that you would use to describe that right
I'm at peace.
now? I love that. And is that something that you feel like has been a wave going up and down? Have you been coasting in that space for a while? How's that been for you?
It's relatively new.
Okay.
2023 has been a big transition year for me, and it just got to a point where I wasn't at peace. And I finally recognized that I wasn't at peace because I kept repeating the pattern of chaos in my own life until I finally had to sit still. And it's really only been a couple of months where I can say, of course, from day to day, from moment to moment, there are highs and lows in our moods, energy levels, etc. But I have this centering of peace now that I don't think I've ever had in my life ever before.
It's such a beautiful way to, I think, capture it too, because there's this idea for many people, I think it's happiness that they chase. And over time, I think we've been conditioned to realize happiness is not the goal. And so now it's peace, it's balance, it's all of these things. But I still think we get fixated on, so everything then has to be calm all the time. Everything has to be in balance all the time. I can't ever screw up. I can't repeat an old pattern. I can't have a hard day. I can't ever blow up at my kid again. Like I have to be able to be in this state of calm. And what I think you're describing is some inner work. It sounds like you did, and some awareness, and probably, your third, fourth, fifth, 12th layer of that healing process, because that's usually how it goes. And then you see on the other side of that you're finding this centering in yourself, that even in the last few months, as new chaos or disruption comes into play, you are showing up differently, as opposed to the external factors are somehow now all stable, solid all the time.
Exactly. Yeah, because they're not stable.
Yeah.
There is nothing in this life that is stable. But that's why I can even more confidently say there's peace in my life now. And it's like who I was even just 6 months ago, a year ago, I would not be able to maintain the peace I have right now. And I've done a lot of inner work because of it. Or to get to this point, I've done a lot of therapy.
Yeah, which I think is such a great natural segue into my kind of initial question, because I got a chance to learn obviously a little bit more about you. We, in our first time meeting, we're like, wait a minute, there's so many overlaps in our stories and our ideas and our beliefs about the world. And so there was this natural.
We should have recorded that first meeting. I know. There's so much good stuff in that very first meeting.
So much. I need to just start doing that. There's somebody else that I was just interviewing for their podcast, and she's like, can I record this just in case there's something great that comes out? I was like, that is such a good idea, especially for meetings like ours. And I just felt this, I don't even know how to put it totally into words. It was like this connection in such a raw, vulnerable place with you. And I think a lot of that was maybe overlap in some of our experiences, but I think a lot of it was just, you can tell you've done a lot of work to get to where you are, and you're very aware of that. You're very aware that there's still work to do. Can you share, for other people meeting you for the first time, or I'm sure there are listeners that have known you before, but maybe they're hearing about you through a different lens. Tell us a bit about that story. Where did it started? When you think about, I've done a lot of work, I've done a lot of this inner healing, where did it start? How do you kind of timestamp the beginning of this journey?
I wish it didn't start all the way back in childhood, but of course it does. It always does. There's always some sort of trauma that triggers this snowball effect of us trying to cope and self-soothe. When I was young, and I mean, I'm talking like 5, 6, 7 years old, I was overweight. Pretty much my whole family was really, really overweight. My mom has been morbidly obese most of her life. So not only from the physical side of, because my mom didn't have good habits, she fed me a lot of really not so great foods, but then it became this emotional thing where everything involved food, whether we were celebrating, whether it was sad. I just remember when my mom was sad, she would eat food. And then, of course, she didn't want to eat alone, so she would give me food. And then I was overweight. And, of course, you go to school and you're overweight, you get bullied. And I remember in 5th grade, I won't say his name because I remember vividly who it was. And we're friends on social media. He called me Little Miss Piggy. He said I looked just like Little Miss Piggy because I was round. I had a round, big face. So I don't blame him as a child. Like, I looked like her, so it is what it is. But obviously, I'm in my mid-30s now, and that has stuck with me. And it just kept snowballing, and I started doing what my mother did, and I'd come home from school and I'd get bullied, and then I would find all the snacks, and then I started hiding food. The disordered eating started really, really early. I was hiding food when I was like 9, 10 years old. But then when I got to high school, I don't know, I just got to this point where I was sick and tired of being bullied. And I said, I'm going to a new school where I don't know a lot of people. And I had an anorexic aunt, and she was really skinny. So in my logical, 13, 14-year-old mind, I was like, well, I'm going to do what she does because it works.
Right. I tried what mom did. Yeah. Mom's way doesn't work. Yeah. I'm going over here.
So I'm gonna flip to the opposite extreme, the opposite dysfunction. And I started starving myself. Hindsight 2020, I'm like, what was I thinking? And how disciplined I was. But that's how dysfunctional I was to be able to make this clear-cut decision of I'm going to start starving myself. And I stuck with it. But this is also the generation where, like, when I was 11 years old, I remember going to Weight Watchers with my mom, and I remember doing the slim fast shakes. Like, diet culture was just running rampant, as if it's not now, but back then it was really normalized, I feel like. And so when I got to high school is when I became a true anorexic, and, early on, I knew I wanted to be a nurse. So the biggest irony of all of this was I was getting sicker and sicker physically and mentally, but my ultimate life goal was to help other people get better. And so as I'm going through high school and I'm starving myself, and I don't remember exactly how much I weighed. I know at one point I got down to 135. Mind you, I'm almost 5'9". And I remember my rib cage was sticking out, and you could see my spine and my back. And my mom started calling me sickly. So I'm like, I can't win. When I'm fat, everyone bullies me. But when I lose the weight at home, my mom judges me. And obviously she was projecting because she was insecure about herself.
Right.
And then going into the end of high school, I started having some really bad physical symptoms. I'm pretty sure we talked about this. I had a bleeding ulcer. I was getting ready to go into nursing school right out of high school. And then I started defecating blood. At this point, I was binging. I was more bulimic. I was binging and purging with laxatives, and I started bleeding badly. And so when I went and got the ultrasounds done and all the blood tests and all these things, like, you have a bleeding ulcer, I knew it was 100% my fault. So don't even get me started about the shame that I carried of this self-induced medical problem. So I was like, I obviously have to take a break from the laxatives. I have to do something else. Well, I didn't know what else to do. And at that point, when you have a binge eating disorder, it doesn't magically just stop. You can't just magically tell yourself to stop binging. It was an addiction at that point. So I got fat. I gained a lot of weight, and I was halfway through nursing school at this point, and just kept self-inflicting more trauma on myself by having really, really toxic relationships with men. I was dating the same man, just in a different body with a different name. And it just continued. And again, it was like I lived a double life for so long, because I was in nursing school. And then, of course, when I graduated, I was taking care of people, helping them get better, loving on them more than I could give myself love. And then coming home and, downing a bottle of wine, binging and purging, or I was going back and forth with anorexia, and I'd just go days without eating. I struggled with that from 14 all the way up until I was about 26, 27 when I remember my last box of laxative pills. I remember the last time I went to the drive-thru for fast food, and I was like, we are not doing this anymore.
Well, so one, I think it's so interesting as you're talking. There's a couple of things that really stood out to me. First is, like, there's such a loneliness in the experience of, I think, any addiction. Having gone through my own eating disorder, some of what you're describing, I'm just imagining being in those same places of loneliness and those same places of self-hatred and those same places of, we're not doing this again. Get your life together. What are you doing? But there's a couple of things I think it's easier to see when it's not your story. So I don't think I would have seen this in my own story right away. But first, Where was mom in all of that? Was mom or any other adult person saying anything to you when suddenly you're dropping significant amounts of weight and not eating? Like teachers, your aunt, well, I suppose your aunt was maybe also struggling, so she wasn't seeing it. Did anybody ever just stop and be like, are you okay?
No,
Interesting.
it was, oh, you're getting so skinny. You look sick. It was never a compliment, ever.
And did people like peers, did you achieve, when you're like, I don't want to be bullied anymore, I want this. Did you get the opposite side of that where it was like the sort of celebration or the attention for your body? Or what was that like?
Girl, yes. I hit my freshman year and I remember I started getting so much attention, especially from the boys. I specifically remember being a freshman and I was getting hit on by seniors and they had no idea I was a freshman. And it was because I had gotten, I went to a new school where not a lot of people from my middle school went. So there were some people I did go to middle school with. They didn't even recognize me because over that summer I it was like, so 13 turning 14, I started exercising a lot, borderline orthorexia even at that age because I had a gym membership. Again, don't understand how my mom didn't see the red flags.
Right.
I cut my hair, I dyed it blonde. So like when I went into high school, I looked like a completely different person, and I became really popular. I was on the cheerleading squad. I became a captain. On the outside, my life was fantastic. It was perfect.
You were what everyone else wanted to be. They all wanted to be you. And that felt good because the other side of it was lonely on both sides. The getting made fun of by the peers, the rejection, but also with mom, like you weren't connecting with her. You were still lonely, even though you were right next to her. You were both just bottling up your emotions in food. And so you weren't getting your emotional needs met on either side. Here, you still weren't, but your brain, again, you're a kid. And I think adults struggle with this too, but there's like, I just want to feel a part of something. And now you were celebrated. So that like primes the pump of like, well, this side sucks too, but at least people aren't making fun of me. They want to be me or they want to be around me. And so we confuse that with connection and belonging. So now you have that. Mom's obviously both sides. She's not really celebrating, supporting, but also not really, it doesn't sound like is capable of being of recognizing your pain. Like she had her own stuff that maybe made it where she couldn't see it through the lens you needed her to at the time for her own stuff.
She was emotionally absent for the reasons you just spoke to. She couldn't even like help herself, let alone help.
Right.
She was also very physically absent. And I hold no hate in my heart. Me and my mom have talked all of this through. I have forgiven her and released all this, but she was gone. When I was 13, she started dating a guy that lived like 45 minutes away, and she was gone. There were weeks she would go for weeks at a time, and I was left by myself, which is how I started getting away with the anorexia and hiding food and binge drinking and going out with boys. Like she wasn't there.
Yeah. And again, you were just looking for some sense of grounding, some sense of connection, and you didn't have that in any other way. So you're going to try to grasp it, whatever you can. And from such a young age, being conditioned with those dopamine hits, the association with food, of course, you're going to continue to chase it. Now there's alcohol and now there's all these other pieces. And the interesting thing, so second part that showed up to me. So one, it was just, wow, there's this loneliness. There's this lack of awareness. It sounds like even maybe from medical providers as something is going on with you. And then you describe this bleeding ulcer and you summed it up as, I know that was 100% my fault. And that felt so intense to hear. And I'm wondering if there's any part of you, like, does 100% of you believe that? Like, that's all your fault. You did this. You're the problem and you caused it?
I mean, yeah. Let's talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's no other reason why I would have had a bleeding ulcer. I mean, minus the stress of what I was going through versus what I was doing to my own body, but I think the combination of it.
Yeah, it just feels like fault is not a totally fair place. Like if you think about like my daughter's 3.5, she's got some kids that really struggle with their hands. Like they hit, they kick, they scream. They have a really hard time regulating. without using their bodies. And so obviously there are things that happen. They've hurt their parents, other kids, like they have a lot of things that have had to come up that they're working on. And when you think about that, like if they hit somebody and they hurt someone, like, yes, on like the very oversimplified sense, we can say you took laxatives, and all the purging and all of the stuff that you were doing was a direct, like the stomach ulcer was a direct result of that. But I think if we just go, well, you're a bad kid because you hit somebody, we're not looking at the rest of the story. And so I feel like there's this like sort of convenient detachment of like a 5-year-old that was never taught how to self-soothe, then was like basically matched with only the like comfort of these behaviors, who then was conditioned to believe that her worth and value was completely dependent on being sort of the it girl and needing to be at the top. My guess is nursing school didn't necessarily feel as good because, again, I'm projecting a little bit, but mine started in the beginning of college. And then just similar things, suddenly getting attention, people saying, I wish I could be as disciplined as you. I wish I could look like you. I wish I could do these things. And I was the kid that was straight A's, A pluses. I then now at this point, my freshman year, lost all this weight. People saw me similar to what you're describing, like she's got it all figured out. And then little things would happen where I didn't. Like I remember I got a C in analytical chemistry. And at the time I was still trying to ride the train to being a doctor, like as hard as I could. And I was unwilling to admit to myself, I thought that was the worst fucking thing on the planet because I was supposed to do it. Because that was the top, right? Like that's
you just
the mountain.
Get that tunnel vision.
Yes.
Like, this is just how it has to be.
Yes.
There's no gray areas.
Yes. And this is what everybody else expects me to be, and I have to do it. And so I have to stay there. So my guess is something happened at some point where you weren't feeling that way. Things felt like you reached a pack of like mud, and now you're sliding back a little bit. So you're going to cling to these behaviors even more if you start gaining weight. Like there's all these things that were happening, and your body was literally trying to protect you the best way it knew how. Yes, hindsight, medical insight, like you and me detached from your story. Yes, probs don't take the laxatives, but that feels really heavy to hold that burden. Like it feels like an incomplete story. And I want to give you the space to release that because that's not entirely 100% your fault.
Do you know how many times I've openly said this story to a therapist and no one has ever pointed that out? And I have therapied it up and no one has ever pointed out that like perhaps it wasn't. And you're right. I agree with you listening to what you're saying. It wasn't premeditated. Like I'm going to take these laxatives until I physically hurt myself and I am bleeding and then I'll stop. It wasn't. Right. I was doing the best I could. And now thinking back, I mean, I don't blame myself. I did the best I could. And I remember when I got to high school or when I got to college, I was full of a lot of anger. My main driver through nursing school was anger. Yeah. As a result of betrayal, because my mom wasn't there and I had a terrible family and I'm going to prove them wrong. Everyone walks away from me. I'm going to prove all of you guys wrong and I'm going to make you regret for ever treating me so bad. How juvenile is that? But it was what I was going through. It was what I was feeling. Everyone left me.
Yeah. I mean, but I think that like, so in the sort of shame defenses category or idea of this, basically it's that when we feel shame, which is that biggest fear, the biggest point of pain that we can feel, because it's the fear of not being, it's not being worthy of love and connection. And so the body responds in one of 3 ways. The first is to people please. So they call it moving towards, basically be everything for everybody else, which is part of what you did as a nurse. And again, we'll get to this, I'm assuming, in a little bit, but the idea that I'm assuming a value for you was always to make other people feel seen and supported and to show up for them. But that got confused with believing that your job was then to do that in a very certain way and to take care of people so that you weren't alone too. Like that is your worth and value, is to be something for other people. And so there's that element. The other 2, there's moving away, which is essentially, and I always compared this because I'm from the Midwest, to like big giant snow piles. So when after a big snowstorm, plows would come in on the playgrounds at school and they would plow it all the way across into this huge pile. And then you'd play king of the hill. And so basically the goal was to get to the top. And the only way you could get to the top is push everybody else down to the bottom. So it was like Well, there's like ice and snow and it's negative 38 degrees outside. So like let's put this in another category of things that our parents and adults probably shouldn't have done. That and like taking their 10-year-old to Weight Watchers, like a lot of decisions that probably shouldn't have happened. But then the idea of moving away is basically the kid that doesn't even play the game because they're like, I'm never going to make it to the top. People don't even want to be around me. Like, I'm going to go do my own thing. I'm going to reject myself before they reject me. It's like the person that's in the bigger body that makes a fat joke about themselves so that somebody else doesn't beat them to it.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's moving against. And moving against typically manifests in the moment as like anger. So when we think about someone's personality, if they feel like they've screwed up. I mean, my daughter, again, my 3.5-year-old does this because anger is one of the biggest emotions they start to really understand at 3.5 and 4. So if she does something and we say, oh, let's not do that, or remember that's not going to happen. Or today she went and she sat in this cabinet and I immediately saw this vision of the cabinet tumbling over on top of her and her dying, which is like also a sign that I need to check my anxiety because the cabinet is strapped and totally fine and wouldn't have done it. But I kind of yelled a little like, get out, and like panicked. She then felt shame because she felt like she did something wrong. And her immediate reaction is to start screaming at me to make me feel bad. So that like moving against is basically, I don't think I can ever get out of feeling like crap because I already believe I'm garbage. And now you pointed it out. So I just want you to feel like garbage too. So when you're like, well, how juvenile is that? That doesn't sound juvenile to me. That literally sounds like what most people do because it's this idea. Think about social media. Every single person listening to this right now, if they are being honest with themselves, they have posted something, shared something, done something in the hopes that some other dickhead from their past sees it and realizes you don't know what you lost, or this is how great I'm doing.
Yeah.
And that is just an idea of those same shame defenses. It's sort of a bit of the moving away with the moving against in there. I want you to feel bad because you fucked up by walking away. You didn't realize how good you had it. Meanwhile, you still don't believe you're good enough to have it. So as you're doing it is where you said, like, I'm still in these relationships with people that treat me like shit. Same relationship on repeat over and over again. Yep. But at least other people have this idea that they're missing out and they're going to recognize that at some point. So it's a very, to me, it sounds like a completely normal place to be in. And again, we come back to like, what a lonely spot because nobody is just holding space to be like, your life is a shit show in this moment. And I love you. No, because you were so good at it. You were so good at faking people out. And to be fair, nobody put enough energy into being inconvenienced by asking the question you needed them to ask, which was, how are you really? And you needed somebody to hold the space and then listen and not need you to be conveniently okay so that they didn't have to take care of you. And you didn't have that. You didn't have a relationship with somebody that was willing to do that.
Nailed it.
Whew. Okay. So this is nursing school, and nursing school is, again, still up and down. You said you graduate nursing school, you start nursing. Did you like nursing? Like, did it feel good to you, or was it just, well, this is something I'm good at and I want to help people?
It it truly is my calling, even though I've kind of pivoted in a different direction. I knew when I was 8 years old. So really before all the dysfunction even started, I was like, I'm going to help people get better. I want to hear stuff. But it did become this codependency thing where, oh man, when I first became a nurse, I worked my butt off because it was right when the housing market crashed. So I decided that if I'm ever going to buy a house, like, let's keep this high achieving, I have to have it all on the outside. So I was like, let me work my very first year as a nurse and then buy a house by the time I'm 22, which I did. So I worked a lot of hours, and I remember I became so depressed. The guy that I was engaged to at the time, it finally blew up in my face where I caught him cheating on me. I was like, oh, in my 21-year-old mind, I was like, well, if I move him to a new state with me, he won't know anyone, therefore he won't cheat on me and he'll stop doing drugs. No, 3 months in, caught him with cocaine in my car, and he was cheating on me with his ex in West Palm Beach. So that all blew up right after I became a nurse, and I got depressed. And I remember, okay, here's some real transparency. I was driving at one point like 30, 45 minutes one way to and from work. I remember that first year in nursing, I could not make it the whole way home without first stopping and getting a drink. And I could not even wait to get home to open it, whether it was a beer or like one of those miniature bottles of wine. I started drinking in the car. because I hadn't eaten in a few hours and I wanted to be tipsy by the time I got home because I did not want to have to sit with myself.
Mm.
And I did that for a good year before I got my house.
And what was the fear? Like, if I go home and I have to sit with myself, like, what were you running from?
Being alone.
Huh. Even though it's this sort of interesting idea that you were really alone, even when people are around before.
Hyper independent. But I was not a safe
Yeah.
space for myself. I created
Yeah.
so much chaos. I hurt myself. I hurt my body. I hurt my own mind with the things I said into it. I was afraid to sit with myself.
So in a way, it almost felt like the drinking became protective for you in a way. Like it was a way to not go as deep as you knew that you would go without it, where whatever you would say or do would become even more destructive. So it almost like made it lighter in a weird way. Huh.
And I rationalized it because I said that I wasn't hurting anyone.
Right.
I wasn't going anywhere. I wasn't doing anything. I was just sitting at home with my drink,
Mm-hmm.
getting wasted on Monday night.
Right. And you were still going to work. You were still, doing your job. You were still, so like, again, on paper, you were fine.
Mm-hmm.
And so this idea, and then again, like people don't notice it. People don't see it. I do think there's also, we're starting to see it now, although I think there's so much lack of understanding of our healthcare system just as a whole. But I think not even recognizing like the toll and the taxation on what a nursing shift looks like, obviously, depending on whether you're an outpatient or you're in the hospital, what your specialty is, but like the expectation and the demand is just incredible. So it's easy in that profession to skate by without being seen because everybody is just so busy taking care of their patients and there's always someone that needs something. So it's easy to kind of mask that there. And if you're working with a bunch of other nurses that are burnt out, they're not intentionally ignoring you. They just don't have the capacity to even see it either. So there was a little bit of protection there.
Mm-hmm.
So at what point, because you said you remember then, you remember your last set of laxatives, you remember your last drive to the fast food restaurant. When did you go, I don't want this anymore. Maybe I don't have to live this way? Because there's the like, I don't like this. I want to deaden the feeling. You were there. We see that. When did this other part happen and how the hell did you get there? Because that feels like a big leap to get to.
A really big trauma. Again, that's myself inside. I was living in my house that I bought, and I had been with this man for almost 5 years. And I remember it was just weeks after I graduated nurse practitioner school, and the plan was that once I finished school, we were going to get married, we were going to start a family. We were all just waiting on me to finish school. And then I finished school and then found out he had been cheating on me with his boss. We all worked at the same hospital. The floor he worked on, his manager, he had been dating her. And when I was working night shift on weekends, he was spending the weekends with her and her kids. They're now married. The best.
Wow.
But that I'd been cheated on before, but that broke something. Like your mind and body can only take so much trauma, especially because I hadn't processed all the previous stuff I had gone through. And it got me to a point where I really did have to sit with myself sober. And excuse my language, but I said to myself, what the fuck am I doing with my life? On paper, I look phenomenal, but I am rotting away on the inside.
Yeah.
And I don't remember the exact moment where I was like, I'm going to change my whole life, but it started with little things like, this is my last box of laxatives because I know how terrible it feels afterwards. And then it was, I'm going to start doing CrossFit, surprisingly. I hired a nutrition coach, and it's so many people have asked me, you had an eating disorder. Why didn't you go to a therapist? And I'm not knocking therapists. Obviously, I'm not knocking what you do. I think what you're doing is phenomenal, especially from a coaching standpoint. I saw what my aunt did all those years. I
Mm-hmm.
saw that it made no difference. I had seen when I was working on a med surg floor, I would see the psychotherapists who came in for the, 14, 15-year-old girls with eating disorders who were acutely admitted and had to be stabilized. And I heard the conversations and I just remember telling myself, oh, that's BS. Like, that's
Yeah.
of no use to me. But it
Right.
wasn't until I was finally ready to heal and bless the dietitian that I hired. It was a huge disclaimer. If you have an active or diagnosed eating disorder, we cannot help you. I just lied. But he helped me so much. He had to have known. Like, the conversations we had and like the repetitive, like stupid things I would do and the binges, because I had to be honest about it. And I finally got to a point where I was honest. I mean, he was the first person I ever told that I had a binge. But it was a very slow process of letting that one person in and being honest with them. And then it allowed me to let somebody else in. So it really was a matter of feeling so isolated for so long, knowing people, but then not truly knowing me. When that last breakup happened, I was like, I'm screwed all the hell. Anyone can know anything about me. I don't care. Like, I have been broken down to nothing, and I'm just going to rebuild who I am as a person. That's when it started to happen.
Such an interesting thing. I know we talked about this when we first met, which is part of our overlap too, because obviously I think therapy can be incredible, or I wouldn't have paid a fuck ton of money to figure out how to do it myself.
Much therapy later on, like in my 30s.
Yes.
It's been useful.
I also think, and I am very direct about this, I think a lot of therapists, I don't want to say most, I think a lot of therapists suck. I think a lot of them in the eating disorder field could do better, we'll say. And there are some that are amazing, but the tricky part is finding that. And I think finding somebody, because therapy is like the most vulnerable relationship you're ever going to have if you have a healthy therapeutic relationship. And so if you're like trying to invest in this relationship and it takes so much time, like who's going to want to do that over and over again until they find the right person? And so I say that to say, I think that for anybody listening, if you're like, I am struggling with an eating disorder, disordered eating, body image, I'm not sure what's going on. I still think that there is an incredibly important space for mental health and physical health providers. Your PCP is a great place to start, or your primary care provider. Therapists that know what they're doing and are licensed and trained in eating disorders can be great.
Yes.
And I had people too. I had the quote unquote specialist of my area never had a problem with exercise. I went, like, even now, I have a great relationship with exercise, but like when my time is done, I'm done. Like, I have shit to do. I enjoy it, but I was never at risk of over exercising. And she was like, told me I couldn't exercise, would like tell me all these different things I had to do. I have one therapist, I walked out of this one where she told me that because I'd had these, I don't remember what they're called, but they're like mucus glands inside of your mouth and they get clogged. I still get it every once in a while, but I was like 10. They were so big. They were like probably the size of dimes all over my mouth. And I had to have this oral surgery to like cut out these mucus glands or do something to these mucus glands. And she went like Freud on me and was like, basically, you developed an oral fixation. And I was like, should we talk about the fact that like my mom was a crack addict, or like that I was on like moved to different family members' houses, or like things that I saw? And that doesn't feel like that big of a thing. But she was so fixated that that's where it happened. I was like, and we're done. And so, point being, it didn't need to necessarily be a therapist, but you needed somebody that was willing to see you. And I think also food can be a slightly easier way than the therapy side for people too, because in that side, it's like, I want a little control. And there's like some hidden benefits. I mean, they're not hidden, but like the subconscious benefits of maybe I can get my weight under control. I can feel less like I'm going to keep binging. Like there are things that were still also alluring for the anorexia part of your brain too, as you're getting started there. And then eventually, as you keep peeling layers off, you have to come face to face with those pieces too. Like I also can't keep restricting, even though I'm no longer binging or whatever that is. And so it sounds like you went through this very layered, very common experience. I think a lot of people think treatment is like this. It's definitely not. I mean, I'm 12 years into my recovery and I still think there's things I'm learning about my body and like how to approach it. What I thought was really interesting that you said, so you talked about being cheated on, you talked about having these relationships where people left you and they hurt you, but you also said that nobody ever really knew you. Like nobody ever really knew who you were at that point. So there is this weird protective nature you had. Like it obviously hurt being lied to, being cheated on, like that doesn't feel good no matter how much they knew you. But you did have a little bit of safety of like, they never knew the full you. They were never fully connected to you because you were kind of expecting like everybody leaves, everybody disappoints me at some point. Has that shifted for you? Like as you started that healing journey, as you let that dietitian and then other people in to start to see other parts of you, can you now be in a place where people can see the full you, like all aspects of yourself in the now, past, and future?
Always.
Hmm.
I'm an open book now. It's like the layers of the healing that I've peeled away have been able to help me allow myself to be more present. Not only because I've been able to release those layers of shame, because I have. And I think starting a blog and being very open about where I was has been essential to my healing. But I had to also just kind of surrender to the fact that people inherently aren't perfect and people are going to hurt me and people are not going to be on their best behavior sometimes. And sometimes it's intentional, sometimes it's not. It's my responsibility to still show up for myself and do what I need to do to take care of myself. And, fast forwarding the story to now that I'm married, we're almost married 2 years. Like I knew if I ever truly wanted to be happy, I had to be seen. I had to be able to receive love. And that's actually when I got serious into therapy because I realized I didn't know how to have a serious relationship. So I hired a therapist and she said, okay, what would you like to talk about? And I said, teach me how to have a healthy relationship because I have no idea. And she taught me. And it helped a lot.
Well, and I mean, you think about, obviously you didn't have it modeled for you. And again, we're not dumping on mom. We're not dumping on other family members. We're not dumping on other adults. We're just fact. You didn't have healthy, open, vulnerable relationships modeled to you. You weren't given the opportunity to develop an emotional intelligence within yourself, with other people, because again, what we said is emotions are scary. We dull them. Or the good ones, those ones we can let people see, and then we just try to enhance them with food, drugs, whatever it is. And so there was no spectrum of processing and understanding. And then you were in relationships with people where you didn't need to be open because again, they were going to leave. And your whole world was, I think, so small in the sense of the people that got closest to you. The safest thing for you to have was people that were going to treat you like shit because that was predictable. And so letting other people in was not predictable. That's not safe. Are you kidding me? Like, I'm going to just be here and let somebody see me. And if they see me and they walk away, then what does that mean? Because again, it still hurt before, but they didn't know the full you to fully fuck you over. Like this would be such a different experience. And so what helped you, like when you think about like a couple nuggets, a couple reframes, a couple radical acceptance points, how did you get to that place of one, trusting that not everybody else wants to hurt you, but I think more importantly, trusting that you will be okay if they do?
Boundaries. That was like the very first thing I had to do for myself, for my friendships, and for all of my relationships. I lost a lot of friends. A lot. And the only reason why I have a healthy relationship now is because I set very clear-cut boundaries and held to them from the very beginning. Like before you even ask me out, here's my rules, here's my fence, my boundary. If you pass them, I will never speak to you again.
Yep.
And it worked. He respected me. I mean, obviously he's a great guy. I'm married. But it worked. When he was like, I laid all this stuff out and he was like, okay, I was prepared for him to walk away. Yeah. So I think like that was just reinforcing like, oh, I did a good thing for myself and they're okay with it too. Yeah. I respected me and he respected me too. It was all like so foreign to me. It's still being married is foreign to me. Like That's one of the things I'm continuing to practice. The therapist had told me, you have to be radically honest with yourself, and you have to be radically honest with your partner, even if it hurts you. Be prepared to be judged because they're human too. And I still do that now. Like the more recent thing was me coming off Adderall. That's just a whole another part to the puzzle. And after being on it for 13 years, but I had to admit to my husband, I am chemically addicted to this drug. And when I come off of it, I am sick, physically sick. And it still hurts because that's still recent. Like having to tell your husband you're addicted to something. But it was no different than my binge drinking. It was no different than my binge eating. It was no different than me starving myself. But I finally have a safe person. And he could hurt me really, really bad with these things. That's the risk you run with being open and real and letting other people see you. But on the opposite side, it only brings us closer. And to have, I've never in my life had the intimacy that I have with this man. It is still foreign to me. It's still new. Still practicing it, but it has helped me save myself.
I think something that you're hitting on is, again, I think on the early part of you, again, we confused this idea of just conformity, performing, enmeshment, codependency. Like we confuse that with belonging. We all need belonging. We don't need somebody else to make us okay. We need to learn how to be okay, even if all else goes away. And that's also still saying we still need other people. Like we can't just live by ourselves all the time. And so there's this very confusing idea of you can't ever need anyone. Don't count on anybody for us to develop our healthiest self. And on the flip side, like all that, like enmeshment is not
independency. That's a coping mechanism
exactly
of itself.
Exactly. And you hit on this point of, it sounds to me like you are on this journey of understanding the balance between independence and interdependence and how beautiful that is and how both parts, you might have different layers you share with different people. Obviously, what you talk about with your husband, you might not talk about with your coworker, or you might not talk about with, the person who's walking their dog down the street or whatever it might be, but you would allow that same person, even if it's a different layer of vulnerability, to show up in all those spaces. And it sounds like that's what you're learning. And I think that's the thing that's so hard for so many of us is, no, I don't talk to everybody the same way I talk to Jordan. I don't talk to everybody the same way that I talk to clients necessarily, but I am the same person now whenever I walk into the room. Yes. I'm not putting on a different hat to be something for everybody else so they approve of me, and then coming home and feeling overstimulated, overtaxed, and so fucking lonely that I just want to binge and purge, to not feel like I am not worthy enough to be in that space.
Exactly. I just want to thank you because I don't think I recognized how far along I was in my healing until you pointed it out. Because I see what I still have ahead of me, what I still have
of course
to
you
overcome. Do. But having this conversation really, reflection is such a beautiful cathartic thing of, wow, I have done a lot of work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you've done it because I think that's that achiever in you. That's that, like, I can do it all, be it all. It's like, what's the next mountain? Let me climb it. Like, I got this. You need me to carry your bag too? I'll carry that bag for you. Like, I got this. It's no big deal. And that's again where it's the shift to, that's always going to be something about you. It's evident in just being here with you. It's evident on your website. It's evident in all of your content that you share. You genuinely have a value of wanting to connect. And obviously that's a thing, like you said, you had to cultivate the safety in yourself and then had to learn how to help others cultivate that with themselves so you can have that genuine connection.
Yes.
And you are still at risk always. You will be for the rest of your life, because shame doesn't go away, of being the person that does it to an extreme. And so needing to pause and reflect back on, wow, have I done a lot? And wow, am I making big contributions in the world by showing up as my authentic self now? And there's still tweaks and aspects to my past story that I can give myself permission to do too.
Oh yeah, I'm totally going to sit on this conversation and me saying,
yeah,
100%. I'm going to have to go journal on that, because that was just like, your therapy came out strong.
Yeah, it did. I know.
like, wait, I don't want to cry on this podcast yet.
Okay, so for people that are just like, all right, so now you've alluded to this, you're bringing this up, Kira, but you haven't given her a chance to say what she does. You started the most amazing business, and I think what you do is incredible. Can you give people just a little summary of what that is and how they could find you if they want to connect with you and work with you?
Yeah. So I will say that our business has been in growing and transition as well. What I originally wanted to start was to help women break the vicious cycle of yo-yo dieting, build a relationship with food, which is still a very prioritized thing that we do within our program. But I really am taking that holistic approach now for the whole human being. And I want to also allow women to come in and teach them, empower them of how their body works, testing through different symptoms that they're having. If they've gone to the doctor and the doctor says, hey, all your blood work looks normal, you're fine, but you're not fine. Especially where my age group, like mid 30s, 40s, going into menopause, women are suffering and they have no energy. They are genuinely in a calorie deficit, can't seem to lose weight. They are losing their hair. They're breaking out like a pubescent teenager and they're like 50 years old. And they're like, what is happening to me? And I really want to be able to take them all in and be like, here's your safe space. Let's talk about it. Let's bring out some of the trauma that you went through that you've just been bottling up in your body the whole entire time, decades, and now it's affecting you physically. Let's unpack some of that and let's do some other actual functional testing and say, okay, what do you need in your life right now to make you feel better? What does it feel like for you to be healthy? What does the healthiest version of yourself look like? Not the skinniest version, not how do you look naked. What does the best version of yourself feel like? But that means you have to give them the space to learn how to feel. So many women are disassociated from their own bodily sensations and their own thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, you and I know that we spent decades trying to run from ours. And so and there are moments where you're like, I wish I could go back to that for a second, because sometimes feeling everything is really hard and overwhelming. But once you start to build a practice around it, you realize there's so much capacity in there to then connect with yourself, to connect with the world in a different way. And I mean, just as you were talking, I'm like, oh, that's that friend. Oh, that's this person. Oh, that's that client. Oh, that's this. I'm like, oh my goodness, you're hitting on all these points that I think, again, we go back and we normalize it. Well, we're all burnt out. We're all doing this. We've all lost our hair. We're all struggling with our body image. We're all doing this. We got to buy that next 6-week program and that next New York Times bestseller book that's telling you.
Common doesn't mean it's
exactly.
Normal.
And I love that. Say it again one more time for people.
Just because it's common doesn't mean it's normal.
And that's the stuff that I think the conversations need to be around. And so for everybody listening to this, again, if you are like, but my labs look normal, my doctor says I'm fine, they put me on some vitamin D and said maybe it's just some seasonal things. It could be. I don't want to say that I know yes or no, everything is right or it isn't. And it is okay if you explore it in a different way. And I think the thing that Kim does that's amazing is she's not coming in assuming she knows the answer. She's coming in with genuine empathy, which is meaning I want to understand what you feel and I want to show up for you in that feeling. She's not trying to make it that she gets it. She's not trying to solve it. She's trying to be there with you. And so I will have links to all of her websites. She's on YouTube. She's on all sorts of social media platforms. Her website is beautiful and gives so much information. So I will have all of that up for everybody so that you can go and check her out. This has been amazing. Is there anything I didn't ask you or any final thoughts you want to share with everybody before we log off today?
Oh, girl, this is like a mini therapy session. This was so good. I'm just glad I didn't cry.
I love it. For everybody else that's listening, if you liked what you're hearing, if you can see another person like how I did, where I'm like, oh, that's this person that you think could benefit from hearing this episode, share it far and wide, let people know all about it. Make sure you check out those links to get to know Kim more and all of the amazing work that she does. Check out all of her social media posts, her blog, everything that is up and available to you so that you can go deeper into her work. And again, remembering just because it's normal doesn't mean it's okay. That is not how you phrased it, but we're going to go with that as we are wrapping.
Just because it's common doesn't mean it's normal.
Just because it's common doesn't make it normal. Look at this. Like, gosh, I nailed it. We've seen it a couple times through. That's all it was.
It's tweetable.
Yeah, exactly. There we go. Awesome. All right, everyone. Well, thank you for being here with me. As always, I will see you all next Sunday. And thanks for joining.